Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of our participant training for AGU's DEI Virtual Advocacy Days. Again, my name is Michael Villafranca. I am the Senior Specialist on the Public Affairs team here at AGU, as well as your moderator for today's training. Just a quick recap before we get started. In part 1 of our training, our teams from AGU's Public Affairs team and the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion team went more deeply into the issue of DEI in science and its importance, and kind of gave a more background into the 3 federal bills that were being promoted during this event. And now, so for the second part of this training, we'll provide more insight into developing your message crafting skills and cover tips and best practices to help make sure that your virtual meetings are a success. Before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode throughout the training. However, we would love to hear from you, so if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. And finally, a reminder that this training is being recorded and will be sent out to all participants after the training, so please be on the lookout for an email from your AGU point of contact. And now to kick off part 2 of our training, I am going to welcome my colleague, Caitlin Bergstrom. So go ahead and take it away.
Hi there. Sorry, I can't request control and then unmute myself and turn on my video at the same time. So thank you for that recap, Michael. Again, my name is Caitlin Bergstrom. I am the Public Affairs Analyst on our policy team here at AGU, and I'm going to be talking today about crafting your DEI message to your policymakers. So Brittany, before the break, had talked about what an ask is, and I'm going to be talking about the message. So they might sound similar, but there is a big difference. So the ask is what is the end goal of what you're trying to get from the office. So in this case, what we're talking about here is these 3 pieces of legislation that we're trying to either get our legislators to co-sponsor or to move through committee. So the message is the way that you actually are delivering that ask to the offices. So it's the framing for how you show why that ask is important to the office. And this may seem obvious to you, obviously, especially in the last week, we have seen lots of folks talk about why diversity and equity is important in these spaces, but it's not always obvious to our policymakers. One moment, please. Again, this messaging is the way that we're delivering this ask to our policymakers and making sure that we are packaging it in a way that is compelling to these offices so that we can get them to sign on to this legislation. So some important things to keep in mind in getting your message across is really just getting to know your policymakers. So it's being able to convey to them how do DE&I efforts impact their state or district. So what is the benefit of having more diverse and inclusive and equitable sciences? How does that impact their state or their district? You can figure out sort of what their values are as well from looking into what committees they serve on, what caucuses they are active in, and what legislation they have sponsored in the past. You can also look up, just do some research basics on your member of Congress. Are they a scientist? Were they a lawyer before this? Did they work in business? And using what you know to sort of pitch your message across, because you wouldn't want to sell something really technical to someone who doesn't know a lot about why this work is important. And like anything, when you're making these asks, it is trying to figure out a way to compellingly sell these arguments. So we all know that diversity is valuable. That's why all of us are here today. But it's important to explicitly show them how increased diversity and equity relates to their priorities. I love that statistic that Margaret shared earlier about how much innovation comes from these underrepresented groups in the sciences. And I think showing that if everybody is able to have a seat at the table, that can really benefit and drive STEM forward. So the last thing that's important about this is in these sort of science communication efforts, storytelling is something that is really critical, and telling the story not only behind your science, but why this work matters to you if you are a member of one of these underrepresented groups in science, or if you are working towards being an ally to help increase the representation, visibility, and retention of these folks in this field. So storytelling is a really great tool to do this, and in all of our meetings, and I think really in any of these kinds of conversations, I feel like I've been seeing a lot this week of sort of how to have some of these difficult conversations with our friends and family, but our policymakers are really included in this if this is something that's new to them that they haven't considered before. So telling stories is proven to keep more focused attention. We have an improved memory when we hear a story from someone, and it connects our emotions and it increases our trust. So people remember stories more than they'll remember statistics or facts and figures. And talking about these diversity and inclusion efforts is inherently extremely personal. Sharing your stories and experiences is a really impactful way to get your legislators to show how enacting these bills can really make a change. So if you have either experienced discrimination or you were benefited by a program that was boosted by one of these agencies, that's a really great way for these legislators to see how this can directly impact their constituents and connect what these bills are doing to an individual. So when we're talking about these stories in these meetings in general, we want to make sure that we're not using jargon or language that might be unfamiliar to our lawmakers. So we have to make sure that we're watching our words and we're not using too many acronyms. Here are some examples of some things that we typically use when we're talking about our research and in science in general, that things like mean, dating, and modeling have very different meanings to the general public than they might do to scientists. But DEI is something that is really new to a lot of folks too. So making sure that we're explaining what diversity, equity, and inclusion are and what they mean is really important. So Brittany found this really great graphic that I absolutely love. So it's using an analogy of how we can include DE&I in a party. So diversity is the ways in which people are all different. Equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people. And your identity can't necessarily predict the outcome. And inclusion is that a variety of people have a power, have voice, and are decision making. But a great way to think about this is diversity is where everyone is invited to the party. Equity means that everyone gets to contribute to the playlist. And inclusion means that everybody has the opportunity to dance. So thinking about different ways to talk about this, I think that this is a really relatable metaphor that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, but feel free to come up with things on your own that are similar to this, whatever makes sense. And we want to make sure that when we're talking about this work, because again, this is a new concept to a lot of people, that we're being inclusive in the way that we're explaining all of this. So finally, this work is really up to you. So you're the person that's asking for something. and you need to explicitly show how this ask supports their values as a legislator and how it can support you as a constituent. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Liz for some meeting. Oh, before that, I'm sorry, do we have any questions? Go ahead and type them in the Q&A box and we'll read them out.
There are no specific questions in the Q&A box at this time, but I will say, perhaps we can address this later. There was a certain amount of interest in messaging do's and don'ts and really being effective in communication. Now, here's a question. We have, would it be a good idea to define diversity, equity, and inclusion when they meet?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, I think that this, for people that have been working in this space, when you say D&I, people know exactly what it means, but I think even people who are doing some of this work don't necessarily have this definition already, and there's a lot of different there's different acronyms to talk about this too. So like diversity and inclusion, or D&I, is used, or equity and inclusion. So there's sort of a lot of different arrangements of the acronym that all sort of mean the same thing, but ultimately the goal of these efforts is to make sure that anyone who wants to be a scientist and wants to be involved in science has the opportunity to do so, and it's working to sort of dismantle some of these barriers that exist that prevent minorities, people of color, from succeeding and staying in their careers in science, particularly in academia.
And Caitlin?
Yeah.
Kind of related to that, is it appropriate, so Karen asks, is it appropriate to combine the DEI ask with another science or policy issue, or should the focus really be on diversity, equity, and inclusion for these meetings?
So I think for the purposes of the meetings that we're doing today, because these bills are focused on D&I, I think that should be included in the asks. But I think especially a lot of what we've been seeing in the last week, I think it's good to integrate some of this inclusion work in what we're doing every day. So part of the reason that we picked these bills is because they are specifically addressing D&I efforts in these different ways. So the sexual harassment, the STEM opportunities, and the rural STEM education are all very targeted bills that will push these D&I efforts forward. That's not to say that there's not other ways to integrate D&I in other bills, but for this, that's what our goal is for these bills. Anything else?
That's all I'm seeing for the moment.
Okay. Great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Liz Landau for some meeting do's and don'ts. Go ahead, Liz.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. I appreciate that. All right, everyone. I'm so glad that you joined us today. Thank you for being here and for being part of this really important program. Now that we've covered our asks and our messages related to DEI policy, we want to share best practices for meetings with policymakers. And I'm going to focus on the federal level policymakers that control the bills that we've shared today. But these tips are really universal and will serve you with any policymaker outreach that you want to do going forward. So to start out, you really want to research your policymakers. This will help you get to know your audience and figure out the best messages to help them see why supporting DEI legislation is beneficial both to them and also to their constituents. Researching your legislators before you go on these visits really allows you to tailor your talking points to their values. And ultimately, that's going to lead to a much more successful meeting for you and for them. Some easy ways to do this include going to their website. Also, their social media is great. These accounts and websites will really show you what positions that they have taken on these pieces of legislation or similar pieces of legislation, which will help you figure out where they stand and what they might be persuaded to do. Congress.gov and govtrack.us are two sites that can be used in the US to track positions on legislation. For our international members who are joining us today, some other countries have similar websites that you can use as well, and we're certainly happy to work with anyone if you have specific questions there. Another great resource is the government relations staff at your institution. You may not have worked with them before, and some people may not even be aware that their institution has government relations staff, but they probably do. And usually they're extremely helpful in working with your federal policymakers. They likely already have established relationships with the office you're going to meet with and can give you really helpful advice. So the first thing, after you do your research, you want to go ahead and start setting up your meetings. The offices will likely need some lead time, and it's never too early to get started. One of the easiest ways to get in touch with a congressional office is to simply call the office using the phone number on the website and ask to set up a virtual meeting with either the member of Congress or the staff person who works on the science issues. Either way, you're meeting with someone who's going to be able to help you out. If you prefer to use email, you can always email the office scheduler or the relevant staff person directly and do the exact same thing. And we've provided sample email and phone requests in your participant packet, so all of that is available for you. If you're having a hard time either finding the right email address or getting a response from the office, remember that we're here for you and we want to help out. So just send us an email, let us know what's going on, and we'll do our best to assist. When you're setting up a meeting, ask them explicitly if they prefer to use Zoom, Skype, a conference call, or some other method for meeting virtually. All offices are still getting adjusted to this new type of meeting, and everyone's doing things a little bit differently to meet their needs, so just make sure that you're accommodating them. If you want to use a video conferencing system, you can sign up for a free Skype or Zoom account. With the free version of Zoom, you can schedule meetings up to 40 minutes long, which should be plenty of time for most of these meetings. I think Brittany mentioned meetings with congressional offices are generally only 20 to 30 minutes long. I also want to note that our staff has found that sometimes individual Congress staff members might not turn their video on during a video meeting, but that's fine, just roll with it. You can go ahead and turn your video on so they get to know you a little bit better. Everyone's adjusting to these changes in their own way. And if you're emailing to schedule a virtual meeting on behalf of a group, it's a really good idea to make sure to CC all participants on that email. So everyone in your group should be included so they can see all the details. Then finally, be sure to get a confirmation for each scheduled meeting. And as you confirm your virtual meetings, please do fill out the meeting schedule spreadsheet that we provide the link to in your participant materials. This is going to be useful for you and for us as AGU staff. The group leader will be responsible for those meetings, arranging them, setting them up, but we're going to use that information to field questions from members of Congress or their staff who happen to contact our office, and we're going to help support you in your goals by following up with those offices as well. So just some tips here. We've compiled some best practices for virtual meetings, which are all in your participant packet for your reference, so no need to write all these down right now. Be sure to do things like download the program or app on the system that you'll be using in that device. So whether you're doing it on your phone or your laptop, make sure you download that well ahead of time. I recommend logging in and testing things out the day before your meeting so you know if you have an issue with your webcam or your sound or something like that. There's always a chance that something's going to happen the day of. We've certainly had it happen right here for us, but this will help make you as prepared as possible. And I also think it helps to preserve internet bandwidth on your device by quitting any other programs that use the internet or use a lot of your computer or phone's memory while you're making the call. Dress professionally, which will make you feel more empowered and show the office that you really care about the meeting. There are questions about suit and tie. I would say a collared shirt or a nice blouse or just a blazer are probably plenty. just because things are a little more casual right now. Make sure that you're not checking other windows or pop-ups during the meeting. Turn them off if possible to stay really focused on the conversation that you're having. And then figure out where and when you'll take the meeting so you can be free from noise and distractions. Make sure you have good lighting and the sound will be clear wherever you will be. Treat the virtual meeting as if it were face-to-face as well. Make sure you're looking at the camera, speaking clearly, and giving everyone in the group the opportunity to speak throughout the meeting. We also want to mention a few things to avoid, a number of things that will distract or take away from the value of the meeting. Definitely try to avoid joining late or right at the meeting start time. You know that's when your computer is going to need to run an update or something. So just give yourself a cushion and log in early. If you want to use the virtual background and you have a program or computer that will support it, that's fine. But make sure it's something very simple that doesn't distract from the conversation. This probably isn't the time to use a funny or cute background that might be distracting. I mentioned before to close all other programs, turn off meeting notifications, pings, sounds, all of that. Mute your microphone whenever you're not speaking to help everyone hear better. And also make sure that you are actively listening for all others in the meeting and not speaking over each other. If you have a group, have a little conversation beforehand, do some planning, that will help alleviate any issues. So speaking of working as a team, I want to address a few additional points related to team meetings. We've provided most of you with contact information for one or more other participants to work with to set up and attend meetings. We do this for a number of reasons. It allows you to divide the work of doing research, of setting up meetings, and leading them. It also showcases the broad support for these asks, as demonstrated by the number of individuals coming together to make the same requests. And it's common accepted practice that congressional offices will meet with multiple stakeholders at once to talk about the same subject. If you have other colleagues who also want to participate, you're welcome to fold them into the group as well. Just be sure to give a heads up to the other participants in your group. And if you don't have a partner or group due to your geographic location, you can invite a colleague or two to join you on the virtual meetings as well. We strongly recommend that you choose a leader for every single meeting you have. Switch off who leads the meeting so everyone gets a chance to lead if possible. Also, a constituent should be the leader of any given meeting when possible. The leader doesn't have to talk the most, but they will be responsible for opening the meeting, starting the introductions of everyone on the call or video call, making sure the ask is made and that everyone gets ample time to talk, and closing the meeting. So it really just helps the meeting run more smoothly if you have one person who's looking out for all of these aspects. So I just want to touch on a few more key tips for meeting with policymakers in general. It's important to be on time and be flexible. They have very busy schedules. Even virtually, they probably have meetings set up throughout the day. So you want to make sure that you are just taking up the amount of time that you pre-scheduled. Someone asked earlier about staying on topic. It's very important that if you set up a meeting to talk about science policy, DEI issues, that's what you're talking about on the meeting. If you also want to talk about other different issues, you can set up a separate meeting another time to do that. Please do keep politics out of the conversation. Respect the members' political views and relationships outside of this particular issue. And whether or not your legislators' political views are the same as your own, every member of Congress values the opinions of their constituents. So just be cordial and work with them. Be sure to be clear and concise. Explain your points in a way that can be easily understood by others with no previous knowledge of the issue, as Caitlin showed you. And remember that you'll be participating in a group, so try and make sure everyone in the group gets a chance to partake in the discussion. And be honest if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it. That's a great opportunity to follow up with them. Talk to a colleague who knows the answer, or otherwise get that information from them and bring it back. They'll really appreciate that. And I also, my final note here before I share some videos with you is about following up. As Michael mentioned at the beginning of the session, building relationships with the congressional offices is critical. The offices are more likely to say yes to your asks, call you in the future, and address the issues that you bring up if they know you. And following up repeatedly over time really helps build that relationship. So start by sending a thank you note with follow-up information a few days after your meeting. Thank them for their time, add a reminder of the meeting topic for the office's reference, include information from a reliable source to keep the office aware of your issue. And after that, attend events either virtually or locally as the situation allows going forward. So this could be town hall meetings or public events, either virtually or in your district. That increases your visibility with the office. And find opportunities to engage in policy matters, including building relationships with district staff to serve as a trustworthy resource on the issue. Stay in touch over time. You don't want to be bothering them constantly, but if you set a calendar reminder for yourself to touch base, say once a month or once a quarter, that really helps make sure that they remember you when they need to contact you for something. And remember that we're working on making progress and that it's going to take time. Think about the long-term goals that you have set and that we talked about earlier today and what you need to do to make progress with each office that you're meeting with. Also a reminder, please do fill in the form at the link that we sent in your participant packet to let us know how these meetings went. That's really helpful to us to help follow up as well and amplify everything that you're sharing. So we're gonna have a little fun and hopefully we have a couple skits that we'll play for you. These videos are created by our fantastic interns, Emily and Caroline. They've taken on the role of two scientists doing virtual meetings with a couple of their congressional representatives. Their meetings are super short and just to give you an idea of how to conduct a meeting well and how to not act during a congressional meeting. So in the first meeting, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. And during the video, I'd like all of you to use the chat box and share your comments on how they could improve for their next meeting.
Hello, sorry we're late. Who knew you needed to download Zoom before the meeting? Anyway, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Emily. I'm just here for moral support.
Okay, well, welcome. Thank you for setting up this meeting with our office.
Of course, we're here to meet with you to discuss the Rural STEM Education Act up in the House.
Okay, great.
Yes, the Rural STEM Education Act is great. It will really help get rural students more involved in STEM and will do a lot for the STEM workforce in the United States.
I'm going to send you my dissertation as well and some journal PDFs that are also relevant to the topic so that you can look through them on your own time, and really read up on this topic. You can expect an attachment in a couple days from now that'll be about 75 pages.
I'm actually really familiar with this particular bill because it's my boss who introduced it in the Senate.
Oh, well, you know, I'm sure that you could still learn by reading through the material.
And actually, we have to go. We're going to be late for our next meeting, but bye.
Oh, okay. Bye.
See ya.
Okay, I hope you all enjoyed that great work by our fabulous interns. Go ahead and drop in the chat box some of the things that you think the scientists can do better for their next meeting. Yep, a recommendation to maybe only send a one-page summary as opposed to all 75 pages of the paper. Absolutely, something short and succinct is great. That way they will make sure that, you know, if they have more questions, they'll follow up with you. Yeah, they were late. Absolutely, you shouldn't do that. Wearing hats, yeah, definitely lose the hats to look professional. Yeah, they need to do their research. You know, they didn't realize that they were talking to someone who had helped introduce the bill, and you know, that's a big mistake. And an abrupt ending as opposed to making sure you have enough time. Yeah, no need for additional materials, better dressing. Fantastic. Yeah, and the saying you're just here for moral support, I mean, that's, you know, you're here for a reason. You're also someone who they should be listening to. Let them know who you are, why you're there, what you care about. Absolutely. Yeah, no real depth in the discussion. They really didn't know what it was that they were talking about. They didn't have any details. They didn't have any good reasons why the office should support them. Absolutely. And too vague in the bill description. You know, if that person hadn't been familiar with that bill, they wouldn't know what it was about at all. Fantastic. Thank you all for that feedback. I can tell you're all going to be much better prepared for your meetings. Okay, so next we have some market improvement, thankfully. During this video, feel free to use the chat box to share what the scientists are doing right.
Hello, thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. I'm one of your constituents and a scientist at the University of Indiana, Bloomington. My name is Emily.
And I'm Caroline, and I'm an earth scientist at an institution outside of your district, but also here with AGU as a part of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Virtual Advocacy Days. We're here to ask your office to co-sponsor the Rural STEM Education Act. Are you familiar with the bill?
No, not really.
That's A-okay. The Rural STEM Education Act is a bipartisan bill that provides funding to address the lack of quality STEM opportunities available to rural students like those in Indiana's 9th District, which is why we think your office is a great fit to co-sponsor the bill and move it forward.
I think this might be of interest to our office. Do you know how much the bill costs?
Yes, so the bill has been assessed by the CBO, and it'll cost approximately $120 million over 5 years for NSF. This investment would greatly improve rural student participation in STEM, helping address the STEM pipeline issues reported by the Bureau of Labor.
It's definitely a tough appropriation cycle this year with everything that's going on, but I think this will be of interest to my boss, so I'll let her know and she can consider it.
Thank you again for taking the time to meet with us.
Yes, thank you so much, and I would love to be available to you as a resource in the coming days, and I'll follow up with you with more information.
I look forward to that. Thank you both. Okay, great. I'd love to have everyone use the chat box to let us know what the scientists did right this time. And of course, I'm having, oh, here we go. Got my chat up. Okay, clear identification of who they are. Yes, that's very important. They want to know who you are, where you're from, why you're talking to them. A good ask, and having those responses ready when the office asks them questions. Absolutely. Provide information about who is the constituent. They were able to explain what the bill is, what its purpose is. Started with a thank you. It's always great to have that if you can. And they had definitely done their research in terms of the bill and how it would impact the constituents of that particular office that they were meeting with. They knew the exact cost of the legislation, well prepared, hit on all the reasons why the bill was important. Yep, knew all the details and the cost, all the numbers right off the bat. Calling it an investment, that's a great messaging tool, right? It's not just spending, it's actually investing, and it's going to provide a lot in return. A very specific ask, they're very professional, they offer to help. That offer of help right at the end, that's a fantastic thing that you can do to ensure that you're building that relationship with your policymakers over time. Very conversational, but did proper research. They were well prepared. And yeah, they were focused on the camera, which allows the viewers to feel that you're present. Fantastic. Thank you for that feedback. So as you can see, the difference between not being prepared for a meeting and being prepared really is huge and can make all the difference in the world when it comes to whether or not the offices are responding to you and feel that you could be a resource for them long term. So with that, that's all the slides that I have. I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box. And Lexi, let me know what we have.
So we've had a number of questions that are on point. I want to start with one that was asked by a number of people, which was, how does this virtual meeting experience differ from the in-person meeting experience?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And for the most part, it's very, very similar. It's really all about getting your message across in an effective way. It's about building relationships. It's about having that one-on-one time or small group time to converse with someone about what's important to you. Even though technology is different and you're not necessarily there in person, it's really going to be quite similar overall. Normally, if you have been to Capitol Hill before for meetings, things are quite formal there. There was conversation earlier about wearing suits and all of that. And, as I mentioned before, I think you can probably step it back a little bit. I still wouldn't wear, t-shirts or hats, as our intern showed us during that video. But for the most part, you're going to have very similar flow to the meeting as you would, and you'll have about the same amount of time, about 20, 30 minutes to have that meeting and make your case.
A number of other kind of more detailed questions. So one was about some of the materials. Does the 2-pager or 1-pager take the place of a business card that you might, exchange in an in-person meeting? And another one was about the value of sending materials before versus after.
Yeah, I think in terms of the materials, having the 1-pager that does include your contact information, which of course is a PDF in this case, or an electronic document, that's definitely something that you want to prepare, and we're providing you information with how to create that in the participant packet if you haven't done so already. And I think it varies by office if they're going to want it ahead of time, during the meeting or afterwards. It doesn't hurt to send it ahead of time. Some offices will look at it beforehand, some may not, some may just open it up when they're having a conversation with you. But I think it can be nice to send it to them ahead so they have it if they want it. And I would say definitely, regardless of whether you sent it beforehand, send it as part of the follow-up as well. It's a great reminder to them. Maybe they didn't really look over it too closely before, but after they had a conversation with you, they want to. Or maybe after the conversation, they're ready to bring this to their boss and say, hey, I think we should co-sponsor this bill. And it just helps to have that at the top of their inbox ready to go to make it easier for them.
Another question is just kind of similar vein. What other kinds of materials are appropriate to send in some of the follow-up? Can they send reports, articles? What kind of appropriate material is there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing to really consider when you're figuring out what to send to them is, is this material clear for someone who's not a scientist, as many of the staff members or members of Congress themselves are? And is it really the best possible thing to convey what it is that I want to convey? Think about sending documents that are succinct, that are summaries, that are very high level, as opposed to something that's really in depth, in the weeds, very detail oriented, or very, very long, unless they're asking for something specifically like that. If they haven't asked you for that kind of document, definitely start with things that are a little higher level and more of a summary type document. Articles are often good for major publications because they are written more in that style that's aimed at a broad audience. They'll usually start with the conclusion up front as opposed to having it at the very end of the document. So I think those can be helpful. Reports can be great. If there's an executive summary for the report, that might be even better to start with. And then, like I said, if they're asking for more details or more in-depth documents, you can go ahead and send those as well.
And if we have time for one or two more, there's a couple of other questions. One of them is a little bit more about what if a meeting becomes controversial. So the specific question was, what if the policymaker chooses to bring politics into the situation? And especially on a topic such as DEI, which, around which emotions can be a little higher.
Yeah, an excellent question. What we really recommend is if someone is taking things off topic or in a direction that you really don't want to go, you use these what we call pivot sentences to bring things back to the point that you want to make. You may say, I can see what you're saying there, but what I really want to talk about is, or, interesting that you bring that up. I'd really like to discuss this, and kind of pivot things back to where you want the conversation to go. Generally speaking, confrontational meetings are very few and far between, but you never know, things could happen. And whenever possible, try and pivot and bring things back to the talking points, to the types of messages that you want to be bringing up, that you want to discuss during that meeting.
And then we have a question which I think we might not have time for, but I want to queue it up for our final Q&A, which is people are interested in examples of how to professionally tell the scientist's personal stories. Some of that work that Caitlin was talking about. But a slightly quicker question was just about meeting requests and kind of best practices in sending that meeting request email. How will people get good responses to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely use the templates that we have provided for you. I find personally, when I'm sending the request, I will highlight even in the subject of the email that there's a constituent or multiple constituents joining the meeting, whatever the case may be. because I think that's always something that catches the eye of a staff person or a scheduler working for that member of Congress. And then in the body of the email, I make sure that I provide information about all the people who would be participating in the meeting. What institution do you work for? What in one sentence at a very high level is the subject matter that you work on? That helps them get a sense of who they're meeting with and makes them feel a little more comfortable saying yes to a meeting, because they can see, okay, this person works at a great institution, or one that's in my district I know quite well. They work on this topic that sounds really interesting, and then lay out what it is that you would like to discuss. You could say the particular bills that you want to talk about, or broadly about getting more DEI in the sciences and related bills. Whatever it might be that gives them a good, clear sense of what they're essentially saying yes to. I find that to be really helpful. And like I said, if for whatever reason they're not getting back to you, it happens. They may be working on a piece of legislation or something that's just taking up a lot of their time. Let us know at AGU. Let your AGU point person know. We're happy to help you out. We have ways of assisting you in this.
Great. That's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for those great questions, everyone. I'm going to turn things back over to Michael now.
All right. Thanks, Liz. And thank you, Lexi, for facilitating some of those questions. So now, before we get to the final Q&A session, which is kind of the last piece of our training today, I just wanted to take some time on behalf of AGU to thank everybody for your engagement and willingness to participate in our virtual advocacy days. And I wanted to provide some kind of like pre-virtual advocacy day highlights. So our event has over 90 participants registered for this event. This is one of our largest advocacy days. Typically, our advocacy days are really our congressional visits days, where we actually do in-person meetings. But obviously, because of the public health crisis, we have just started this new virtual advocacy day event. And so we're really excited to have so many people who have registered. We have 36 states represented, plus DC and Puerto Rico. And this event has the ability to potentially do outreach to about 132 legislators, and that's Senate and House combined. So we're really excited. Thank you so much again for engaging with us. And so now we'll go ahead and turn over and do our Q&A session. So I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we'll go ahead and have our panelists turn their videos on and unmute themselves. And if you have questions for any of our panelists, regardless of the topic related to the event, from various sessions, please drop them into the Q&A, and Lexi will moderate this Q&A session.
Great, thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Hi, everyone. To introduce the disembodied voice you've been hearing, I'm Lexi Schultz. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at AGU. It's been fabulous moderating your great questions so far. I want to start actually with the question that I teed up just earlier, which is, how does a scientist tell their own personal story professionally in these meetings, particularly around an issue like DEI, which can be quite personal?
So I can start with that, if that's okay. AGU's Sharing Science program is our science communication program, and they have lots of really great storytelling tools to talk about this. But I think that I guess I'm sort of struck of the idea of professionally telling your story. I'm sort of the personal belief that we should be bringing what is important to us in our personal lives into our professional lives. And I think that the purpose of this storytelling is to do just that, to sort of bridge that gap and show what's important to you as an individual and why these issues are important to you as a scientist. So I think it's important to be concise and to get to your point, to sort of share what happened, share something around a story, what the outcome of it is, and if the purpose of you sharing that story is to say, I think I had said this earlier, that, oh, if there was this kind of legislation that existed when I was a graduate student as a woman of color, it would have made it much easier for me to progress, or because this program existed, it has made it easier for me to stay in STEM as a woman. So anyone else have anything to share with that?
Yeah, Billy or Margaret?
Oh, I'll let Billy speak first.
Oh, go ahead. After
So
you.
I was just I was just gonna say, I think this is a great question, and I think this is a bit of, I would say, for personally, I think this is a personal decision you have to make about how much you feel comfortable sharing. Because I will tell you, more from the lobbying side, there are definitely some medical groups, and when they go meet with staff or members of Congress, you know, part of their goal is to make you cry, to really get you to feel empathy with their situation. So, you know, I think, so that, all that to say that I think this is a personal discussion. I'm not encouraging you to take that tactic, but I'm just saying that I think you might think of advocacy as a very kind of impersonal thing, but really this is about getting another person to relate to you. And so I think it's, you know, just how comfortable are you with sharing your own story, you know, to convey why this is important.
Yeah, so and if I could add, I think depending on who we're talking with, I like to share my own personal story sometimes about how I found my place in science. And I grew up in a very small town, poor town in North Carolina. I didn't know any scientists. I knew I wanted to be one, but I didn't know any. But when I was a high school junior, that was many years ago, I was admitted into an NSF-sponsored summer program at a college campus as an 11th grader, rising senior, and that did it for me. So my exposure to science through an NSF program really made me see I belonged. There were people like me who were interested in science. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of opportunities for exposure to science and other scientists, to people who might not normally have that chance for exposure. So that's why I think support for NIH, NSF, and other science funding organizations is very important.
And just if I could add, you know, as Caitlin, Brittany, and Billy kind of said, your stories can be incredibly powerful, and having emotion behind the stories is appropriate. But you also have to think about your audience and understand how that emotion comes across. If anger, which can be a part of your story, predominates in a meeting, it can potentially have the meeting go sideways. So as Brittany said, that's why I think it is a personal decision, and you have to think a little bit about whether you're able to bring your story in and even the emotion in a way that you feel will leave room for conversation and discussion, as opposed to closing down that conversation. Because after all, as some of the speakers have said, this is about continuing a relationship with the congressional office and asking them to do something. So, yeah.
Can I just one thing? If you're interested in examples of personal stories, SACNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans in Science, they have a tradition where you bring your whole self to the meetings, to your science. And people typically, when they're introducing themselves, they give a little bit of their background and then move on into the science. So if you want some examples, check out their website.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, and let's see if I could jump in as well. You know, we have seen a lot of data from Congressional Research Institute, others that you know, look into what it is that the offices are interested in, what sways them, what makes an impression on them. And the data has shown that it really does help to have personal stories. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, there's so many people who are affected by this, but if you can tell a story about an individual, whether it's yourself or maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's, you know, someone, a student that you've seen, those kinds of stories can really make an impression, because it's very easy to make a personal connection in that way, whether it's your story, a colleague's story, or otherwise. Having a very personal aspect is helpful.
Thank you all. And in a somewhat related question, we had a question about what if somebody has quote unquote old-fashioned views on DEI? In other words, what are some best practices about communicating to someone who may not really be as familiar with the topic or the issue, or, you know, may not quite understand even why it is an issue at all?
I always say, if they're not swayed by the, you know, this is the right thing to do, then money, I mean, it's, you know, it's the patriotic thing to do. It's for the good of the country. So.
Yeah, if as Caitlin mentioned, you know, when you're doing your research, if you can find those hooks, those messages that will meet them where they are, that will apply to their set of values, you know, those are really useful as well.
Great. And if I could add also, you know, again, there's kind of the moral persuasion, but then there's also the context of the future of our country. It's about kind of how we grow, both in terms of our innovation, our economy, our well-being. It depends on having as broad an array of ideas, innovations, views as humanly possible. And so the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't apart from issues of innovation and advancement and a strong economy. They're very much connected to it. So for those who are not swayed by, you know, the ethics around it, there are many, many other reasons, and there's lots of messaging around that. If you don't find that readily in your background materials or anything else, again, as Liz said, the HU staff are here as a resource, and please use it. So I'm going to switch to a couple of practical questions. So there are some people who have been matched with others in their district or state, but there's a number of people on the call who've been kind of our individuals from a particular state or district and have been matched with others. So we had a question of how should they connect with their groups? Are they setting up meetings for everyone in the group or just themselves? How does that work? Michael, maybe?
Yeah, Michael, if you want to take this.
Sure, I'll take this one. Yeah, so for the groups that are individuals, so what we've done is put you in groups based on your legislators, the similarity between your legislators, whether it's majority Republican, it's not necessarily by region. And the idea with your working groups is really to work together, bounce ideas off of each other about messaging, where you can work together on messaging. You won't be attending necessarily the same meetings together. You won't be attending each other's meetings. You will be scheduling your own meetings with your individual respective representatives and senators. But the idea is to work together as a group to kind of help make sure that you feel as prepared as possible to have your meetings with your legislators. And Brittany, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, if you've ever done a congressional visit with AGU, you were likely matched with people from other states in your group. But unfortunately, that's just not something that I think works as well in a virtual setting. And so if you're the lone person from your state, you're probably going to be doing visits on your own. But I would say, see if you can find a colleague to join you. This is how we've set it up. If you would feel more comfortable with another person being there, you know, feel free to maybe organize that within your own groups. And I would also say, you know, we've recommended a certain number of meetings with you with your specific legislators based on the addresses that you gave us, but don't feel like you need to do all of those visits. You know, if you want to concentrate on doing 1 or 2 visits, that is perfectly, that's still very awesome. And we would still be so happy for you to do those visits. You know, we definitely would rather you make that 1 connection than stress yourself out making 5 connections with your legislators. And also, we are seriously here to help. So sign up for office hours on Friday, or just contact contact your AGU point of contact, or also always sciencepolicy@agu.org. This is what we do, and we are here to make you feel comfortable doing it as well.
And one other kind of short question: if someone has like one place where they live and another place where they work, is it better to set up a meeting based on their home, address or their work address, or both?
I can answer that too. So, so the way that the teams were set up were based on the address that was provided. So we're assuming that the address during registration was your residence, your home residence, and that's where you're really a constituent. That doesn't mean that you can't meet with a representative from the district or state if your work is actually in a different state. That doesn't mean that you can't meet with that particular representative. In fact, they welcome speaking to people working within their states and districts, especially if your particular work is affecting whether it's the economy or affecting any aspect that they care about within that particular district or state. But the focus in terms of like what we have laid out for you in the provided resources is based on your residence.
Great, thank you. And I want to switch back to a little bit of a bigger picture question for Billy and Margaret. Can you talk a little bit about kind of AGU's approach to diversity, equity, inclusion? How are we thinking about it? What are some of the steps that we're taking as an organization?
Yeah, I will lead. Margaret, you can fill in or follow. So one of the things we have in AGU is an approach in which DE&I will permeate all of our programs. So AGU just approved a new strategic plan, and of its major goals there, strong diversity and support for diversity and inclusion is one of the 3 strategic goals for AGU. Some of you might already know that we also have a strong and recently adopted D&I strategic plan as well. But all of these go hand in hand with our very exceptional, I think exceptional, D&I advisory committee for AGU, which helps promote, advise, and challenge us on best practices to incorporate across all AGU programs. So our approach here is to make it fundamental to everything we do. D&I does not come from Margaret or me. We certainly help advise programs just like this effort that you're engaged in today from Public Affairs Department. That didn't come from Margaret and me, that came from within that program. And I think you'll see the very same things happening across publications, talent pools, honors, meetings, and all of that. And we sponsor an annual review with the D&I committee to hear everything that's going on across AGU. And this committee does not hold back. They're not shy in terms of advising on where the shortcomings are, things we can do better. But one key initiative now we have is to put in place, so we think we have some good initiatives underway, some impactful initiatives, is to put in place our metrics, so our dashboard for AGU, which will also be available to the public. So what are the things that we're promoting and measuring across AGU to indicate whether we're advancing or not on D&I related activities in STEM. So this is an ongoing discussion. We have a meeting on it this week with AGU Council. Our plan is to have that adopted across all AGU by the end of this year. So hopefully soon after that, you might see some public face for AGU D&I metrics going forward. And we also share and promote very, very aggressively across organizations, across other organizations. So anything we do, we share. Anything somebody else is doing, we borrow with their permission. So I think that's the approach that we take here at AGU.
Margaret, did you have anything to add? Okay, and actually that's valuable, Billy. Thank you for that. There had also been a question about working DEI messages into department positions and statements. And so support for kind of the academic community on this, I think, is also helpful. I don't know if you wanted to call out anything in particular we have on that.
Yeah, we do have, for AG, we have what we call the Ethics and Equity website. And within that website, there are a lot of leading practices and statements and other things that I would encourage anyone on this call to go in and look at those, because there are some important pieces of information I think you can use, adopt, or take back to your own organization. So that's a place to look. But also, if you come across something that you know that's happening within your institution, or that's something you've come across through your reading that might be valuable for sharing more broadly, please bring that to our attention as well, because we can help promote that out more broadly across, not only across AGU, but across all of STEM in our efforts going forward.
And we have a question from Linda about kind of whether it's appropriate to specifically mention George Floyd's killing within the policy meetings. You know, it's obviously so top of mind. So what are views about that?
So I'll start this. I would say, you know, obviously some novel times we're in right now, but I think the discussion that we have that is most relevant to this is, you know, when we're talking about climate change in meetings. And I think the advice we give participants, which I think applies here, if you feel like bringing up George Floyd's murder, like very specifically referencing it, is really going to shut down the conversation before it starts, I probably would not. And that's not to say that it's not important and critical and probably the first thing that really comes to all of our minds. It's really more about how do we like continue that dialogue. And I think you don't want to like kind of shut down the dialogue before it happens. So that would kind of be my advice. It's the same way where, you know, in some offices, we don't talk about climate change, but we will talk about sea level rise. We'll talk about ocean acidification. We'll talk about extreme weather, but we will never use the word climate change, climate variability, you know. So I think think about your end goal, and also remember that this is the start of a relationship, so that one day, maybe in a year or 2 years, or unfortunately, maybe 5 years, you could raise something like George Floyd's murder and the office wouldn't bat an eye. I think we've seen that work with climate change. And, you know, I think all of us who are here today probably hope that through this work, we will get to that point with all congressional offices as well. I don't know if anyone has anything more they'd like to say.
I'd just like to add, for those who may not be as familiar with the climate work, some of the issues around that are, it deals very much with knowing your audience and connecting with the values of those audience that you may share. Whether or not it's your primary value, you know, what you may share is the commitment to make the science basically broader and the most powerful force it can be for our country. If it's an office where they're likely to share the value based on writings on their website or things you've seen them say over social media or other things, and they are speaking about George Floyd's murder, then by all means, that's something that you can connect with immediately. Otherwise, as Brittany kind of alluded to, you come in through a back door. You find ways of opening rather than closing. And there are, I mean, I do, well, let me ask this question next, because this is something that came up a number of times, and one of the goals that folks had for this workshop, which is about building relationships with policymakers. We've alluded to it. But how do you maintain and foster a good working relationship with offices even after this virtual meeting or set of meetings?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that. So, you know, I gave a few tips before, which were kind of specific things you can do, like attending other events that the office is putting on, like town halls or local events. They can be virtual, they can be in person, just depending on the situation and when things are safe. But really showing up, you know, being visible. And I think over the long term, you really want to think about what are the issues that I want to follow up with. Are there additional things I can bring up, either related specifically to DEI science policy or other science policy issues that we can talk about over time that the office will care about, and then weaving the DEI aspect in over time, you know, to keep bringing up that subject matter and keep it on their minds. You know, as you're finding new information, new resources, if you see something you think might be useful to the office, either it's a topic they're interested in or it provides some additional backup or information related to what you've already discussed with them, that could be something great to send them. Hey, thought of you, you know, here's this article on XYZ. You know, there are lots of opportunities like that to just keep yourself visible over time. And also anytime that you can say thank you for something, say something positive to the office, if they do wind up co-sponsoring one of these bills that we're asking them for, absolutely follow up and say thank you. It's so great to see you co-sponsoring this. Maybe there's another ask that you can then move on to. Maybe there's another bill they could potentially co-sponsor at that point. You know, we often tell our participants, you should think about, you know, can you invite the member of Congress to visit your lab or institution? And that may not be possible right now, but you can think about what are the other things we can invite them to do. Could it be a virtual meeting or symposium that we're holding with some of the scientists at our institution? Or are we having a virtual event that we'd love to invite them to? Like maybe you have some kind of presentations for your undergraduate students or something that might be a great opportunity for them to connect with some people in their district. So just think about what those opportunities are going forward, and try and follow up and keep that relationship going over time in those ways.
Does anybody else want to add anything? Okay. And then one of the questions was about kind of working with our international members. So obviously the main focus of this event today was about communicating to US policymakers about you know, US bills. So just wanted to know if anyone wanted to comment on any of the resources that might apply to some of our international members, and if there's other follow-up. Maybe Michael?
Sure, I can start us off a little bit. So I would just say that, you know, obviously the topic itself is not, you know, it's not just the topic in the US, it is a topic, you know, in other countries. So I think that even though just, you know, even looking at the participant packet, and I will also highlight that we have a new social media toolkit that we have uploaded into that Google Share Drive for people to use. Some of it does focus on the bills, but, you know, just, you know, international members can obviously utilize that to help, you know, participate in this event, spread the word. You know, you may be able to, depending on, you know, what country you're in, you may be able to engage, you know, with your local policymakers there, depending on what the setup is in that particular country. But I think there's a lot of resources, you know, as Margaret you know, mentioned during her session earlier, there's the anti-racism toolkit that is also provided in the Google Drive that is also useful for our international members. So there's a lot of you know, several resources that we have provided in that Google Drive that our international members can utilize, and we will hopefully be able to provide additional resources in the coming week.
Yeah,
go ahead, Brittany.
Oh, I wanted to add, I would say, I think in this moment, you know, Michael talked about our social media toolkit. I think we've seen the power of people sharing their stories on social media. So I think don't underestimate that. But I would also mention that, you know, AGU's public affairs team, we have our Bridge blog, which is, you know, bridging science and society. And I think we would love to see some content from our international members, honestly, on this subject or any others. This is an area we're trying to delve more into, and we're really just trying to figure out our place in the world, so to speak, very punnily. And so, yeah, so please check out the Bridge blog, and I'll probably ask Caroline to link to that here. But we would love to share your story on our blog.
Yeah, if you have ideas or pitches for that, you can email the AGU science blogs, and we will talk.
And thank you, Caitlin, Brittany, Michael. Margaret, are there any other resources for our international members kind of on the broader issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion that you and Billy have talked about?
No, I feel like the document that we put into Google Drive is pretty exhaustive. But anything that Billy and I find that we think is worth sharing, we put on the website. So keep checking that out too.
Great.
Yeah, and there is
Yes,
some work, some collaboration in the way with both our colleagues in EGU, European Geophysical Union. They have a D&I working group. I participate on that group as well as Lisa White is on that working group. And also we have members from the Japanese Geophysical Union in that working group as well. So we try to share things internationally in terms of what our practices are, because frankly, they're dealing with some of the same issues. The focus in EGU and JPGU currently, however, focus more on gender diversity.
Great. And I will also say we have a number of members who are, they live overseas, but they are still US citizens. They still maintain either home or work addresses in the United States. And you are still in that case a constituent and are free to act like you are sitting in the US at the moment as you request meetings and setting up meetings. So, you know, please take advantage of that. And I just on the issue of kind of international science policy in general, I will say, particularly on this topic, but on many others, they are very international. We don't have as deep a base of knowledge in some of the other countries as we would like. And what we are really seeking are really great resources to help our colleagues in other countries know best how to engage in science policy. So there's always social media, there's always working with and talking to your colleagues. That is not, I mean, that is always impactful, but we are going to be sharing as deep a well of resources in terms of international science policy as we can on our website. And over time, what we'd really like to do is open that up and understand where there are opportunities to connect in particular countries. So any of our international participants, you are some of our best resources on that. So whatever you know, please share with us at some of either during our office hours or at sciencepolicy@agu.org or any other means. We would really, really appreciate that. So, and we will be following up with any other international participants who are not otherwise participating in congressional meetings who are part of this group. With that, that is the last, oh wait, there's one more question. Can AGU help with setting up meetings with international governments in the same way AGU does for the US? So I'm gonna ask Brittany and or Michael to comment on that and I will follow back up.
I would say, I think we might have access to limited resources to help you do that. But we would also be, I think, happy to help you connect with, especially I would say our EGU colleagues in terms of helping to set up those meetings. So I would say we're happy to try to facilitate as much as we possibly can, even if that involves some sleuthing on our part.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for that, Brittany. And that's part of what I meant, where we don't have as much of those connections. What we are trying to build are the connections to others who do. So right now we have connections with JPGU and with EGU, but we are definitely looking for additional resources like that. Are there any other last burning questions? Because if not, I would like to thank our panelists very much for their time and for their expertise. And I also would like to thank all of you for not just joining today, but for participating in this with us. We think it will be really impactful, and we could not do this without you, and your commitment to this issue is very well appreciated. Okay, if there are no other questions, Michael, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I just want to echo what Lexi said. Thank you all for engaging with us. Just a reminder, we are having the Science Policy Office Hours on this Friday. Again, I have put the link into the chat if you'd like to sign up. If you're not able to make that time frame, please reach out to your AG point of contact. We are here to help you to make sure that your virtual advocacy days are a success and make sure you feel prepared. So please reach out to us. You will receive an email in the next couple of days with the recording of this training, along with maybe a couple of additional resources. If you want to reach out before then, please feel free to do so. But thank you again, everyone, and good luck with all of your meetings.